Arson. Cinderella was a fire starter. There is only so long a girl can stare into cinders before the ashes set fire to her eyes. The prince just didn't understand. I mean, sure, he was charming, but he was no fireman. He just couldn't grasp why her skin felt so hot in his hands. He didn't have the kind of stare that is drawn to the white heat at the center of a flame. He couldn't look her in the eye, didn't ask her name. She pressed her cracked lips together and felt just a flicker of disdain. By the end of the ball, it had grown into a blaze. Cinderella walked out of the ballroom, her glass heels licked by the flames, as the whole castle burned to the ground. Cinderella filled up a glass slipper with the ashes and cinders she found. When was the last time you read a poem? Genuine, not rhetorical question, like think in your head when the last time was. Because I feel like with the exception of sort of English students like myself, for a lot of people, the last time we read a poem was actually in like a GCSE classroom, in that kind of environment. And the impression that we have of poetry, even later in life, is as something kind of dry and fusty and that you're made to study. And that was actually also very much my experience. I am currently studying an MPhil in mostly Seamus Heaney's poetry. I feel like other people here were probably also kind of subjected to his poetry in the GCSE anthology. And whenever I read the poems, I was so put off his work that I didn't read it again for maybe another 3 years. And obviously, as a poet, I wrote a poem about that. And there will be more talking afterwards just to dispel the idea that the whole talk is sneaking towards the poems. There is that too. Changing my mind. In a whole book called Changing My Mind, Zadie Smith wrote that there were some books she would never read as a child. When her mother left them on her bedside table and thought she would like them because they were black women's words. Later, she said, I didn't want to read them then. I didn't want to like them just because they were like me. I used to feel the same way about Heaney. I thought just because he is Irish and Catholic, that doesn't mean that he speaks for us all. But a few weeks after I finished school, I went to Donegal. And his words were how I understood this strange home country. I didn't bring any of Heaney's books with me, but I heard the place names in his tone, like Bruch, Annahorish, Inishowen. Malin Head is as far north as Ireland goes, and pilgrims rearrange the bleached, chipped bones of the land, these tiny, perfect stones, into names, into love, into era, into poetry. As we drove the laneways home, Heaney's words kept coming back to me, the end of that short poem of his, Bruch. The last, the strangers all find difficult to manage. I have never yet felt stranger, more at home. So obviously I am somewhat biased, and I should declare that, but I feel like poetry is something that really can be relevant to more of us, to our everyday lives. And I think part of the reason I think so is that the type of poetry I do is spoken word poetry. So that is poetry that is intended not to be encountered by kind of reading it on the page, like in a library when you have to, but by hearing it, by having someone stand up in front of you and perform to you the poem pretty much exactly as we're doing now, not always at a TED Talk, but this is still the general idea. And if you sort of come away from today and all the incredible ideas that you've heard and think, what can I actually do to action those? I thought I would provide an incredibly simple one, and it's listen to a poem. Because spoken word is not quite everywhere, but nearly everywhere in the UK at the moment. There are lots of successful nights in lots of the big cities. It's increasingly performed at a lot of festivals. Also, huge amount of it on YouTube, just from all across the world. So if you kind of think, like, oh, I want to reconnect with the TED thing, type in spoken word on YouTube and listen to some of what you find. And I ask you to do that, not just because a lot of the poetry there is incredibly beautiful and just hugely well written, and it's something that I love and really enjoy, because, and this is for me what I find, I don't know, so fantastic, so important, so inspiring about poetry. It gives us access to other people's perspectives in a way that I think otherwise we very rarely have. So I have a very vivid memory of being about 13 and waiting for the bus home on Royal Avenue in Belfast and watching the woman at the bus stop who's sitting there and being like very nearly in awe of the fact that I had no idea what was going on inside her head and she had no idea what was going on inside mine. So I don't know how many of you saw the dress that went viral last week. A couple of people are nodding, but I thought that that was also incredibly indicative of just how little we actually know of each other's perspectives on the world. And for the record, it's definitely white and gold. So that, for me, is something that poetry can do, a way that we can tap into other people's perspectives. And I'm going to end by performing 2 poems for you, which I hope illustrate that. The first is a companion to the first poem you heard, not just because it's also another kind of twisted fairy tale, but also because it presents one of those stories from a slightly different perspective. It's based on the story of the Little Mermaid. So I don't know how well anyone knows the story, but the original is like profoundly grimmer than the Disney version. So the Little Mermaid falls in love with the prince, just the same, and in order to be with him, she has to trade in her tail for legs and her beautiful singing voice for never being able to speak again. But where it sort of diverges is that in the original, although she's a wonderful dancer on her new human legs, every step she ever takes on them feels like knives are being stabbed through her feet. And then after all of that effort, the prince doesn't even love her back. Yeah, I know. So she turns into sea foam and she floats away. So I thought that was awful, and I wrote this poem about it. It's called Ariel. No one ever told you that you cannot sing these new words any more than a man can waltz on the surface of the sea. No one ever told you that in this language there is no poetry that will fit in the shape of your lips. You see, this language has another word for beauty. Things don't sound this way where you come from. So you stand in your fishnets and knife-edge heels, and you learn how to kiss with your new tongue that they tell you you taste of salt. And they say the women in our country do not talk this way. But no one ever said that the language you'd known that was easy as air, words tattooed on your bones, the language as dark as the country you're from, would be uprooted, torn like a hook from your tongue, that new words would be sharper than you've ever known, would be bright as a pearl, bright as sea foam. And to end slightly more cheerfully, the last poem that I'm going to perform for you is called, again, just something I wrote thinking about the idea of the relevance of poetry. And it's called Autocomplete. It's based on, you know, whenever you start to Google something and Google fills in the rest of the answer for you? People are nodding. I was incredibly behind the times and found out very recently that the answer it comes up with is based on what people have commonly searched for before, which puts some of the things that come up in an entirely new light. So this poem is completely composed of things that come up when you start to type a phrase into Google. Yep, autocomplete. God is dead. God is love. God is not dead. God is an astronaut. I am learning. I am legend. I am Groot. I am feeling lucky. Are olives good for you? Are 0300 numbers free? Are ghosts real? Are mermaids real? Are vampires real? Are you there? How will we evolve? How will we defeat ISIS? How will we recognize the Antichrist? How will we love? Does anyone really know what time it is? Does anyone still use MySpace? Does anyone survive Ebola? Does anyone actually live in Greenland? Love is strange. Love is kind. Love is patient. Love is an open door. Is love real? Is love at first sight? Is love enough? Why is he ignoring me? Why is he avoiding me? Why is he not texting me back? Why is she ignoring me? Why is she avoiding me? Why is she wearing leggings? Should I stay or should I go? Brackets, lyrics. Should I update to iOS 8? Should I text him? Should I get a flu shot? Should one get married? Should one tip for takeout? Should one always tell the truth? Should one invest in gold? Are we done yet? Are we officially dating? Are we going to war? Are we there yet? What do we think of Tottenham? What do we say to the god of death? What do we do with the drunken sailor? What do we mean to each other? What do contractions feel like? What do dreams mean? What do hedgehogs eat? What do they know? What are carbs? What are prime numbers? What are the 10 commandments? What are your weaknesses? What are we looking for? What are we looking for? What are we looking for? Thank you very much.